Welcome everyone to Simplifying the Project Plan, Visualizing a Project Workflow webinar. This is me, if I can get to the screen here. That's me. That's what I look like these days. It seems like I have less hair there, less hair these days than I do at this particular moment. And here's just a little about me. I wrote a book. Actually, I've written a number of them, but the topic of the book is Visual Project Management, Simplifying Project Execution to Deliver on Time and on Budget. And I'm also the founder and president of Pinnacle Strategies, a consultancy that implements these sorts of things. And I'm a bit of an operations geek. I like to take things apart, put them back together, and I also ride my bike a lot. And after this webinar, I am going to ride my bike for sure. Now, here's what we're going to cover in the next hour. We're going to talk about how to take a complex project and break it down into manageable elements. We're going to discuss how you can organize your team's workflow, how to set the foundation, and all of those two things will set the foundation for your team's collaboration. Now, what I'm going to share in the presentation is three things. The presentation is divided up into three sections. The first part is why should we visualize? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I want to give a reason why. And then we're going to talk about the basic elements of the visual project board. So this is the concepts section of the presentation. Then we're going to talk about how to create the VPB, the Visual Project Board, or the Visual Portfolio Board. Essentially, what we're going to be doing is teaching you how to go from a process that maybe looks like this to something that maybe looks like this. Now, before we start, what I want to do is I want to get a poll from everyone, and I'm going to put a poll up here. Let's see. And what I'd like you to do is take a moment, if I can get to it here. There we go, launching the poll. All right, so here's the poll. What I'd like you to do is take a minute and answer this question. What's your biggest project challenge, all right? And you can choose multiples if you like. And I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay. All right, interesting response. Let's see, we've got a few more people. Go ahead and vote. Yeah. I need to have Jeopardy music or something like that for this process here. All right. Well, voting is closed. I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to show it to you if I can get to the screen. So what's interesting to me is that, all right, most of the people is getting the work done, the right work done at the right time, and followed by, what do we got there? That's 71%, followed by too much time in meetings. People hate meetings, engaging, and getting the right message to the people. All right, well, fortunately, those are the things that we're going to talk about right now. Now, what I'm going to talk about, you know, what I've learned and heard from working with project teams is that managing a project is a little bit like driving in the rearview mirror, all right? People are, you know, asking the question, why do we have so many meetings, or the meetings that we have are not productive? Why do we spend so much time doing status reports? And by the time we figure out what has been done, we have no time to figure out what is to be done. People complain that managing a project is a little bit like managing a haystack. You know, there's so much detail. that project managers are having difficulty finding what's relevant. I had somebody tell me one time, and I quoted her in the book. She said, I have no idea whether we're in trouble or not. And, we've got these project plans that are thousands of lines long, or even hundreds of lines long. It's just trying to figure out what's the highest risk, which is the one that needs our attention right now. Do I have enough resources? Can I do something now that will pay off later? A lot of this information is lost on people. They just don't have it. And some people think that managing a project is sometimes like the telephone game, where it's not clear what needs to get communicated to whom and when it should be communicated. And how do we prevent oversharing? So sometimes we share something about our project and somebody gets excited, and we have to spend our time as a project manager just trying to calm things down rather than focusing on moving the project ahead. And so that leads to a question about tailoring our message, right? So different stakeholders need a different spin on essentially the same message. But I think the big thing here is that people are complaining about is how do we prevent distortion? Can we communicate clearly what the status of the project is, what we're supposed to be doing, what the risks are, and so forth. And of course, all of this it contributes to a general lack of teamwork. We can't clearly see where we are or what's needed. We've got different functions, different perspectives. Everyone listens to WIIFM, what's in it for me radio. And people are defensive and unwilling to share. And of course, what happens is that, problems don't become opportunities for problem solving, but they become opportunities for blaming someone, which, of course, is never makes for a good team relationship. So I think the biggest, at the core of all of this, and when we talk about people working as a team, it's really about collaboration. And people can't collaborate if they can't see what needs to be done. And, the core problem is they just can't see where they are. And the project manager can't see where they are, particularly in knowledge work when we're dealing with where we don't have a physical thing to look at, but it's paper. And of course, what happens is that people end up working on the wrong things and get surprised by, well, they just get surprised. We'll just kind of leave it at that. To really get good collaboration, you have to have clarity, right? People need to know, where are we going? They need to know, well, where are we now relative to where are we going? And of course, what do we need to do next? And these are the big three questions that the visual project board. Oh, I forgot one question. Who's going to do it? So these are the big four questions that the visual project board answers. Right? It makes it the visual project board or the visual portfolio board, if you've got multiple projects, makes it easy to see where you are and where you're going, and shows a path, shows the work, shows where you are, what needs to be done. Now, visible information is actually the shortest route from understanding to action. Brain research shows that we decipher visual information simultaneously, whereas language and text are processed sequentially. And so having a visual aid significantly reduces the time needed to understand information, and thereby promoting a rapid understanding of any situation. The VPB is your map. Now, what will a visual project board do? It simplifies the task of managing your project. It reduces the amount of time dramatically spent in meetings. It builds engagement with your team, and it just helps you communicate faster. Your team has quicker response times, they're sharper focused, you have less distortion and rework. Let's think about, I was going to give you a short personal testimonial, but we'll do the testimonials later. I think, the VPB clarifies the situation. It gives a quick read. There's no status reporting. So the VPB eliminates a big chunk of what's happening in meetings just by putting a visual up there. One of the things that the visual project board does is it points to what should be done and not who, rather than who is to blame. So the visual project board creates transparency in your project plan and your project team. So it's objective what the problem is, not who is at fault for creating the problem. And that means it's not threatening, so people don't get defensive. One of the great things about VPB is about the visual project board is it distills information and it gives you clarity on where the critical issues are. So this is, again, one of the, if you think about the time that we spend as project managers, what the visual project board does is really distill down that time. So you're not spending a lot of time sorting and picking through the information to find what the critical issue is. If there's a bottleneck or a gap on the board, the team members aren't wasting time arguing because it's obvious where the problem is. It really stands out. They know where they are. Now, it promotes a team effort. Now, I want to say that the board doesn't create a team effort, but it promotes a team effort. So if you are a naturally collaborative team, or even if you're not a naturally collaborative team, the board can become a rallying point for your team. It gives clear accountability. And when I talk about accountability, I mean accountability in terms of you've got this thing to do, I've got that thing to do. Okay, I'm going to depend on you for doing that. And it allows for it answers the question, what do we do now, right? It can be created for any process, almost any process. I haven't found any process yet. Some of the ones that we've done for advertising campaigns, construction, engineering, software development, production like shop floors. So I started using visual boards on the shop floor years and years ago when we didn't have scheduling software, and all we had were a few machines. So I think it's quite adaptable to a process. Now, what the VPB is, all right, what it is for you, it's a lever to promote communication. So if you've got a communication problem on what's the right thing to do, when do you do it, this is a lever to do that. It's a map, shows you where you are, where you're going. And it's also a behavior reinforcement tool. One of the things that we hear from users is how they like to be able to use the board to reinforce positive behavior. Hey, you pulled a rabbit out of the hat for that. That was a great job. Thanks so much for doing that. It helps you build the cohesiveness of your team. And it's also a way to escalate problems because every project has difficulty, things happen. So what the VPB does is give you an objective way to show that this particular problem needs to be escalated to a higher level of management, or to another department, or whatever it is. So now that I've told you what it is, here's what it is not. It's not a replacement for planning. Now, I know that if you've watched my webinars or read some of my stuff, I talk about how planning is not the answer. And but I want to say this, that the VPB is just a tool. It's a summary of your plan, not the plan. So it's not a replacement for doing good planning, and you'll see more of this in a minute. And it's not the solution to all of your project problems. So I consider the board to be a single element, probably the most basic, the most fundamental element to improving your project execution process, but it is not the answer. So what's the board? Let's talk about the basic elements of the board. Okay, so here's a board. It has rows, it has columns. In the columns, we've got stages of doneness, not started, doing, done. At the most basic, if you look at some of the other information on visualizing workflows. I mean, this is the most basic. Here's the stuff I have in my queue. Here's the stuff I'm working on. Here's the stuff I'm done. But I think what I want you to get from this is that you have varying stages of doneness or ownership of your project. And then you have value categories, and that can be, products or customers or features. And I'll talk more about this. Now, your process is probably not that simple, otherwise you wouldn't be in this webinar, but we'll start here with the most basic elements. Stages of doneness and value. Oh, and one more thing, the work. Forgot about the work. All right, so the work are the cards or the Post-it notes or whatever. They are the elements of work. All right, now the board starts with something like this. All right, some representation of this is a hand-drawn process map. All right, and then of course we make it pretty. All right, so it might be a PERT diagram, and I'll show you one here in a little while, or it might be the stage gate process, but the process definition is what's defining what are the task predecessors and successors, deliverables, and accountability. So before you even build a board, you have to spend time with this. So this is your input to your simplification process. Now, when you're mapping the process, what you want to look for are changes in state. All right, meaning transformation stages, process steps, stage gates, handovers, changes in accountability, gating processes, decision points, and I've got gating processes here is like approval points, that sort of thing. And also, while you're mapping, you want to look for similarities between projects and types, because remember that what you're doing with your board is you are distilling your project process down into something that is usable, but is also representative of the most important management points of your project. So you think about your board as it's the distillation of your most important management steps. Now, let's start with the first part, and I think that this is always the most difficult when building a board, all right, is defining what are the columns. And the columns are your management points, your handoffs, your major phases. All right, so they can be, something as simple as this. This is, I don't know how many I've got. I've got 8 columns here. If you notice, this particular column echoes the most basic thing, where I had not started, and then I had starting, so in work, and then done. So obviously in this particular instance, we got a little bit more detailed, but in defining your columns, the question you want to ask is, what is the most important process that are needed to get done? And I say most important, and when we talk about most importance, which are the ones that require the most attention? And note that within each of those columns, there are little subcolumns. So there's in appraisal, approved, and then ready essentially for the next. So what they've done in this particular design is they've created the major phases of their project, but they've also created sub-phases of their project. Something else to consider when you're doing your columns is not just the stages, but also transition of ownership, right? So these are different departments, right? So appraise is one department, select is another, define is another column, ready for construction is another, construction. So defining your columns, often you're dealing with handoffs from one resource group or ownership group to another. Now, in building your columns, start with something that's descriptive but high level. right? It does, you do not want to reproduce your workflow or your project routing in here. This is high level stuff, simple stuff. If you need to get detailed around what you consider to be the constraining or the critical processes. Now, what's constraining or critical? Those are the ones that you have problems with. Those are the ones that people are complaining about, where stuff is getting stuck. So if you need more management, that'll be the area that you'll want to break down that column. And as I pointed out earlier, we've got sub processes within, so we have columns within columns. So this, I didn't draw the vertical line in this, but you could have done that. All right. So some things to think about for doing your columns. Like I said, look for management or accountability changes. Sometimes you might want to have a phantom step, right, where there's actually no work, because I think the general rule for columns is if there's activity, it's a column. If it's a decision, it is not a column. However, sometimes the decision process, making a decision, is in itself a process, right? So, it might have to have 16 people sign off on a document or something like that. Sometimes people like to have the queues of work. This is ready for this stage, so it's done, to clearly show it's done with this, it's ready or waiting for the next stage. I think the thing I want to emphasize here is that, at the beginning, don't get too complicated here. Start simple and then graduate to more complex, more columns, more details later. You don't have to do it right now, because your team is going to figure out what the most important things are. And it's not important that you start with a finished project. And I'll talk more about that later. So when we're thinking about columns, what we're looking for, so you're going through your process map, as I said, and you're looking for similarities. So what you're doing is you're saying, okay, what I'm building on my board is all work will follow roughly the same process. So if you've got two kinds of work, and I'll show you this here in a minute, if you've got two kinds of work, you're going to be doing two kinds of boards. All right, so this is the clarifying thing here. Some steps could be added or taken out, and building the columns will push you towards building the swim lanes or the rows, which is the next thing that you have to define. Now, the swim lanes or the rows, or I call them the value streams, those are the categorization of activity, right? So you have the various transformation stages. Now you have the categories, and here I'm showing them, by project. I also say that they're the value streams, where value is created. So sometimes it's by location, sometimes it's by resources or functions, sometimes it's by a product, sometimes it's by a project manager, sometimes by a customer, by feature type. The swim lanes are essentially what you consider to be value, and what I don't have on the slide here is accountability. Sometimes that there's there's a person that's responsible for this product, or a person owns this customer, or a person owns this feature. So there's an implied process ownership to each one of these value streams, although within each task, there might be different people who are responsible for accomplishing different tasks. Defining them. Now, there's two approaches. There's what I call the organizational emphasis, and that's what I just finished talking about. There's a process owner. There's also an activity or project or portfolio emphasis. It could be person, resource pool, department, division, location. And I think what I want to emphasize here is that an organizational emphasis would push you towards these kinds of swim lanes. Now, there's another approach to building these swim lanes, and that's a management emphasis. And where is management focusing their attention or need to focus on their attention? So it could be on a customer or installations. It could be on the work, final assembly, sub-assembly. It could be on feature types or functionality. It could be engineering. It could be an engineer name, right? I mean, we've built these boards for the largest one that we did was 450 people. We're managing 450 people, 500 projects. And the smallest one, we had a work group of about 7 people. So each one of these boards are going to fit the environment depending on what the emphasis is of the management team that is managing this work. So if you're at the portfolio level, it's likely that you're going to be, each one of your swim lanes is going to be a project or a customer. If it's a work group, it may be a skill, or it may be a person. However, the point is not that there is a right answer. The point is that there is an answer that works for you. Now, let's see. So tips. Building your swim lanes. All right. So you've given you the criteria. Who owns the value stream or the final outcome, right? So this is a question you want to ask for defining that lane. Does all the work, how can we classify the work following the same process? Making this evaluation starts very early in the process of figuring out what is the work. And don't feel like every product has to go through every step. We've built boards where we've had some products will skip certain steps, or some products or some things in a swim lane will have extra steps. It doesn't really matter, that you can be pretty flexible and not be dogmatic. I think, what you want to be in building your swim lanes is have something that works for your team. Now, the common element of the swim lanes is it's a grouping activity. It easily communicates the value creation process, so you can see quickly at a glance how things go forward. And then we can start to populate the board with our cards. Now, all right, these are Post-it notes, all right? So we still call them cards, even though they're Post-it notes. But the point here in developing your cards is that they're simple and not comprehensive. They may get complicated later, but at the beginning, you want them simple, easy to maintain. The biggest problem, or the biggest fear, not the problem, but the biggest fear that people have is when we're using these boards is people are afraid that, oh my gosh, now we've got another thing that we have to do. And of course, what they find out is that, what they find out is that there's less work later, but at the beginning, your board has to appear simple, non-threatening, low overhead, and you can add stuff later, all right? Because the board's going to evolve anyway. But my point is, if you look at this card right here, all right, here's a card. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's only got 6 data elements on it, right? It has, what's the project name? Who's the project manager? How many lines? This is a coding kind of a thing. This is what's the side? What type of project is it? Who owns it? It doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to be descriptive. And which brings us to the next thing, right? So, here's this particular one has 7 items on the card, right? So this is the same thing. I've jumped ahead a little bit, right? Project name. Here's a due date, complexity, size. So they're looking at the projects because they've got different kinds of projects going through the process. How long do they think that it'll take? And notice it says short. It doesn't have the hours. Who owns the task? Who does the task? Very basic stuff. And one of the things I want to point out here is that one of the things that I think differs from the viewpoint approach from other approaches is the necessity of managing the delivery dates. Now, this particular card doesn't have a date on it, but it's important to note that due dates are still important, and it's not just enough to go fast. So if dates are an important part of your reality, then you've got to have it on the card. Now, another thing you can do as sort of a seventh data element, if you like, or an additional data element, is just change the color of the card. So you can see these cards have like, this particular card has a, I don't know, maybe an orange tab on it. And when I show you the pictures of the real boards, you'll see different colors for the cards that mean different things. Now, sometimes what people will put on cards are checklists, lists of activities. Here are the things that need to get done. Sometimes they're acceptance criteria. You know, what does done look like? Now, I'm not going to have time to show you what other card, you know, in our case studies, we're not going to go through making cards because I think they're pretty self-explanatory and we don't have a lot of time. But again, the thing you want to know about cards is that they're representations of work packages or work elements. What is the size of work that you're managing, the work package? So what goes on? So what's in a board, right? You've got the categories of the process, the owners. You have the types of work. You have transition phases, and you have the work packages. And those are the four basic elements of the board. Now, I'm going to show you how to actually do this. Now, I'm going to show you two cases. The first one is an organization that does projects over and over and over again. And in this case, they're doing data analysis. They're taking a lot of data and they're doing visual representations of that data. And started off with their process map, so you can see that, you know, we eat our own dog food, so this isn't just something that we make up along the way. And you can see already that he's got his categories of work are emerging already. So he's starting planning, design, scoping, QAPP, field work, data processing, and so forth. And he's got these various Post-it notes that are describing the activity. What are the inputs? What are the outputs? Now, in this case, they had the categories of work were by region. It was a multinational organization. So they had, you know, Asia Pacific, Middle East, Europe, Americas. They had projects and they had managers. And those were the three main categories of work that they were managing. And they had different kinds of work. They had planning, they had designing, and they had analysis. And there's a fourth category of work, and that was really about processing, but that fell under the analysis stage where they put the data into, you know, an array of supercomputers to come out with something that made sense. And then they had the transitional phases. So the transitional phases were, you know, what's the scope? So, you know, every customer is unique, every job is unique. So they had to define what is it. Then they had to get it approved and reviewed, and then they had to collect the data, and then they had to archive it. And of course, what's missing here is the doing part, right? There's a gap missing here. So from that process map, they were able to pull out the categories, the types of work, and the transition phases at the beginning, all right? So these are the basic building blocks. And then it became a pretty board like this, right? So what I want you to notice is that, all right, so here are the basic phases. There's project scope, planning and design, QAPP and contract. And also, they've also in field work, I'm gonna go to the next one here. They've also highlighted where are the decision processes, and you can see that you know, there's one decision right there, which I can't fully see on my screen. There's a decision there, a change in state, another decision there, a change in state there. So one of the, they're from the process map, it's clearly defined in terms of, when do things change from one thing to another? Where are the critical decision points in the process? And then they were able to categorize, or essentially do the transitional stages carrying over from that hand-drawn process map that I showed you. And I've given it to you on the left-hand column as well, right? So it goes from scoping, planning, and design, and you can see it across the top of the process map. All right. Well, that process map became this board. All right. So there's you've got step one over there, way over on the right. Actually, it goes. I don't know why I did it that way, but so you can see how the categories are moving. The stages of work are moving, and notice that they're already subdividing some of their work. Here, I'm going to go over here to this QAP contract, right? So they've got 3 stages of work that they're managing. So what I want to point out here is that we start with one thing, which is our hand-drawn Post-it notes and lines and butcher paper, and then we make it pretty, and then we distill it down and sometimes expand it back into the board, because these are the areas that they wanted to manage. So you can see planning and design, draft, scope, and RCR, which I do not remember what RCR. And then there's project scope, and you can see that they've got 2 different things right there. Now, what they did in this organization was they organized it by project manager and then by project. So you can see on the left-hand side, we've got different colored cards. We've got orange, green, blue, and red. And each project manager is a different color, but each project is a different swim lane, if you will. And the projects are also tightly linked to the customer. So, or region. I don't remember exactly how they did that. But this is the process where they do things over and over. What I want to highlight here is the transition from the changing of going from this to this to this. And they're not all precisely the same. And you're going to see that more in the next case study as well. Now, the next case study is essentially going through the same process, but this one was a lot more difficult because it was a lot more complex. It was an enterprise software implementation. So here's a project where they're only going to do it once. Now, when we showed up, we had a little bit of raw material. So here is this was what they were using to manage their software implementation. And what you can see are the different kinds of activities and the dates across the top. So they had a simple Gantt chart. And I see Gantt charts used a lot from project managers. But the problem with this is that the task dependencies and accountabilities here are not clear. It tells us what to do. I mean, okay, we're going to do data conversion validation, and we're going to do back office remediation, and we're going to do front office, middle office content review, and then front office, middle office remediation. He has kind of a rough sequence of what needs to get done, but it's not well connected, and there aren't names to it. So he said, well, this is kind of the direction. And we see a lot of projects like this. It's a great start. So from there, we've got the basic elements. We've got the categories of work. He's got front office applications, back office applications, mid office applications, and then subcategories. So I want to emphasize here, this is not, there is some software development in this, but this is a PeopleSoft Salesforce implementation. They're replacing their IT system essentially. And so they've got a lot of customization on screens and terms and that sort of thing. So they're not it's not like they're what's the word I'm looking for? It's not like they're inventing something new. But it's new to them. They have different kinds of work. All right, so they've got coding and training. Then they had the transition phases, which were coded, tested. Then they had conversion phases, phase 1, 2, 3, 4. And then they had deployed. And then they had go live. So these were the basic elements that we essentially started with in this project. And of course, it was hard for us to make sense of that PowerPoint presentation. So we started with a rough categorization of the work. And, we're building the connections between the different task elements, and we've got different categories. So, we've got code freeze and data in the training environment, load test, data conversion load, cutover processes. And then along here, we've got the different, I would call them different groups. So a data group, coding group, infrastructure, training groups. We're trying to make sense of all of this and how it all fits together. It worked okay. And then over there on the right-hand side, you can see, the different activities that are associated with that. Now, we took that, all right, and then we put it out. I want to back up a second. So this is in a conference room, we're just talking amongst ourselves. Then we took this out into public and we put it up on the wall. And I want to highlight here a couple of things. First of all, you can see all these pretty Post-it notes, and the different colors here indicate different kinds of things. So the blue colors are business process sorts of things that involved what we'll call the user community and the training community. And then the red ones, this was all of the IT activities. So we took it immediately and we split the board apart. We split the work in two and said, well, this is one group of resources, this is another group of resources. And you can see that we're starting to draw arrows. This comes before this. And note that after we put it up on the wall, people started writing. All right, so like here's partial data, partial load. People are starting to add stuff to the board. And notice that, see this line right here? This is supposed to be project start. And then people started adding stuff before that because holy cow, we've got to do this and this. And oh, here's a risk. E to E scenario testing, who's going to do that? Do we have, oh, here's another thing. We got to get those workarounds approved. What about QA data test? Do we have or want disability into the decision-making process? So putting the process map up on the wall really fed the team engagement, really helped them understand their work, what they needed to do, who needed, and they started identifying risks, and they started really buying in to this process. So we started seeing benefits, and they started seeing benefits even before we started doing a board. It's their tool, right? So it's important to get the buy-in to the tool. And if they're contributing, it's not your tool anymore, it's their tool. Now then, of course, we took that and we put it in the software and we made it all pretty, and we came up with a network PERT diagram that showed all the tasks and all their relationships, all right? And so one of the things that we realized is after this element right here on the far left, there was about 8 things that could start immediately. So we had like a simultaneous start that could start right away, which was kind of interesting to us. So we would say, well, okay, how do we put that into a board? We've got all these things start on day one and they can all run simultaneously or in parallel. I don't know. But we were able to transition. We were able to see different stages of the project. So here's the transition from testing to release. So one of the things that we were able to do is take that intuition that we had gained in building the project networks and start to visually see, all right, here's a decision point, right? Business approval, functional code freeze. So this is a major part of where the project should start. And then after that, it's only after that, these tasks on the right can start. We can only start user acceptance testing after we get the business approval. So from there, what we did is we built a spreadsheet. We built a board mock-up of the spreadsheet. So you can see that here, we've got these little red blocks here. These are code frees. And then on the left, you see we've got front office, credentialing, back office. You know, we're starting to do some categorization on where it was. But what I want you to see is how we took that network and we started adding things, how we transitioned the network to the board. So we had, you know, the manual process analysis. We had QA defects and remediation. We had, you know, the business approval. We had, what's this last one? The smoke test, the integrated smoke test. Now, what I want you to highlight, what I want you to see here is we've got like all these different columns in the mock-up. This was just a starting point for what we did, right? So, you know, we played with it a little bit and we put the columns that we thought were most important, and then we put it up on the wall and we brought the team together and we showed it to them. We said, okay, well, this is what we think. What do you think? And of course, you know, some things they said, oh, this is really great. And other things it's like, yeah, but this is really not that important. And we really need this other thing, which is much more important than that. So let's use that. And so we went back to the board and we made another version, right? And we ended up doing kind of a cycling. So what you can see here is you can see like this is conversion number 5, and then here's number 6, and here's number 7, and then I can't quite read what's over there. It might be number 8 over there. But the idea then is we saw that the process of the transformation process was actually moving in stages. And then we had this other thing down here. We actually made a decision to separate the board. So down here, we've got business processes and user training. So we actually ended up creating 2 boards with this. So we're not able to create a single board with a single flow because the processes were so different. So we ended up creating 2 boards. And I want to tell you that that's not the first time that's happened in a project where we've had 2 boards. We've done one where it's like engineering at the top and production at the bottom. Very common. So then we took the board. Here's our board, right? So what I wanted to show you here is here's the different stages and how they mapped to the board. All right. So we did it again, and there's Luis and Camila. They're explaining the board to the team again. And then we ended up creating what I would say, this is not the final board, but the board that we were ready to start with. Now, what I want to highlight here is, you know, we had the transition phases, right? Coded, tested, the conversion phases, deployed, and live. So we had our 5 basic phases, and that we had that process. And what I want you to see here is notice, all right, from our process, they turned into columns, all right? So there's our manual process analysis, data remediation, but notice that there's a gap between these 2, right? So we went from process analysis to remediation, but they added 3 more columns, parallel testing, cycle 2, the testing environment or the training environment, and then QA. And I want you to note the pyramid, or not the pyramid, the diamond up there, which is functional code freeze, right? So that's a decision, not necessarily a stage of work, but they wanted to highlight that this is really important. We have this right here. Now, on the swim lanes turned out to be completely different, and this is a really late stage kind of thing. If you remember if we look on our mock-up, we sort of have kind of front office, credentialing, back office. Credentialing is sort of a department. Front office is sort of a category of all the front office applications, the Salesforce applications, essentially. Back office is all the PeopleSoft stuff. And what we ended up with the board was something that looked more like this, right? It was divided into front office, and I can't show you the full board, but we ended up with front office, mid office, back office applications on our categories. And notice what they did here is they took the front office and they subdivided it into different features, right? So they had front office sourcing, front office candidate application, candidate pre-screen, branch interviews, on demand. So each one of these Post-it notes became a little subset of the front office work. So what we ended up with was essentially a very complex plan that was stripped down into features which were essentially by a category, then by feature, and then the most important categories across the transformation process. So that's the two examples. Now, you're building your board, right? I would say the most important thing that you have to do in building your board is you want to understand, how does work move from one part of the process to another, all right? One of the things that happens is, particularly in process mapping, is you have to define, when does a card move from one column to another. This is very useful for the team because it tells us what is done, what is complete, what is these acceptance criteria. So there's actually some process improvement that's going on in terms of clarifying who does what during the implementation. The other thing I hope that came through in the webinar was that this is an iterative process. It's not, you are not going to put that board up on the wall and everybody's going to salute and follow. That is not what's going to happen. They're going to find fault with it. They're going to tell you it's wrong. So what you want to do is you want to say, present the board as a possibility and let the team contribute to building the board. It's going to be their team. If they're going to use it, they should have a voice in building the board. So my experience has been that the board probably goes through 4, maybe 5 iterations before it finally settles into a final version. Now, use the board as a springboard, all right, for other things, managing dates, doing process measurements, defining resources, other things. But don't do that at the beginning. At the beginning, what you're trying to do is just build yourself a map and not get too complicated, all right? Start with something simple, all right? Start with something simple. You have to fight the urge to make it complex. People will want to make it complex. They will want to add stuff to it. And you're going to walk this line between getting buy-in from the team to use it and people wanting to add stuff to it. There's no hard and fast rule of how complex should it be or how simple should it be. It should be simple enough to use and not create a lot of overhead, but complex enough that it gives the right information to the right people at the right time. And I'm sorry, I can't be more prescriptive than that. Sort of the consultant answer, I guess. I think at the end, that the board, I think what you want to emphasize with your team is that the board is not the end, right? The board is just the beginning. The board is a way for you to communicate with your team. It is not the thing. I think I've talked about it in other presentations. The board is not the thing. The thing is what happens around the board. So the board is your tool to get people together, to get them to do the things that you want, right? So you've made your board, all right? Your plan is visual. Now what do? Your work now will shift to building a collaborative execution process. And when I say working together, I mean you're working together as a team. There are accomplishments to be achieved. Everybody's working towards the same objective. All right. So when we're talking about collaborative execution, this is what we're talking about. It's, as a practical matter, it's really get the right people to do the right work at the right time, and focus your team on issues, not status. And this is how you can get people to collaborate. All right. So your next step after the board is essentially to build that collaboration process and figure out, all right, I'm going to have these stand-up meetings, all right, because that's the whole point of the board is having it up on the wall where people are, where it's public. What are you going to discuss in your meetings? Who is going to be there? What's inbounds? What's out of bounds? How often do you have the meetings? What's the, I put 3 terms in there. What's the cadence? What's the rhythm of your project? We do projects where it's like, twice a week, every day, once a week. It doesn't matter, but you have to decide what that is. Who plays what role? Who's going to do what in the, who's going to run the meeting? Who's going to be the facilitator? What happens when, a key stakeholder is not there? And I think that this is, there's enough material there to do another webinar. So I think I'm going to do another session on designing the collaboration process, because that's really where the magic happens. Now that we have our board and we visualized our process, now we can start really bringing people together. So here's what I want you to stop doing. I want you to stop using spreadsheets and email to communicate. Make it visual, right? But continue to bring your team into your process, into your project process, and start making your project visual and get a method to execute. So why build one? Because it's simple. Simple. The amount of overhead to manage a project goes down exponentially when you're using a visual board. It really helps you communicate faster and better. The frequency and the quality of communication, both across functions and up and down the ladder, the chain of command, so much better, smoother, easier, less friction, and you will spend a lot of time, a lot less time in meetings. Everyone that we do this for says that they spend less time in meetings, as much as 70%, because all of the work is already done. And if you need to engage your team, this is what you should do. All right. Now, I got an offer for you. All right. So the first 3 people, what I will help you do is I will convert your plan. I will help you convert your plan. I won't do it, but I'll help you convert your plan to an electronic board. All right. So we have this product called Viewpoint Visum, which is an electronic board. And what I'll help you do is I'll help you convert it to an electronic board, and I'll give you 60 days free, a free subscription. So all you have to do is send me an email. The first 3 people that say yes, I will let them, I'll do that. Now, thank you for coming. That's the end of the formal presentation. Now, what I'd like to do is hear from you. You have a Q&A function on your board. Go ahead and answer in the Zoom toolbar. Go ahead and please ask whatever questions you've got. And if you want, I can have you, you can raise your hand, I guess, right? I think there's a way to raise your hand, but I'm not sure how that works. No questions. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, good question. All right, so I've got my question. My first question is, shouldn't everything on the board also be in the project plan? And the short answer to that is yes. Everything on the board should be in the project plan. So you're not going to find stuff on the board that is not in your project plan. What you're going to find is that The board will have less detail than what's in the project plan, not more. Yeah, one of the great things about the board is that it exposes hidden work. So we had a project one time where we had people that were doing work that wasn't even in the plan. Why are you doing this? Good question here from Dirk. It looks like the VPB is based on the Kanban method. Is it? The short answer is no, it is not. The Kanban method has some things in common in terms of what we're doing. Actually, we created this long before David started using Kanban. But I don't want to say that Kanban is bad. It is not. Kanban has similar kinds of things. It has stages of doneness. It uses cards. It uses the stand-up meetings. I would say, but it doesn't have things like dates. Kanban doesn't articulate the need for having measurements in line. Kanban doesn't articulate does not have an execution maturity model. So the short answer, that's a long answer to a very good question. If you want to ask a follow-up, go ahead. What is your recommendation on designing the dependencies? All right, designing the dependencies, we use the Six Sigma. Let's see, I want to call it. SIPOC, System Input Process Output. Where what we're doing is we're looking at what information do we need, or what do we need to start a task, and that becomes the output of the predecessor tasks. So this is what I was saying earlier about when you're building your board. One of the things that happens is you're actually defining what are the requirements to start a step, which pushes you then towards, which gives you the raw material to start controlling your work in process and begin a clean start or full kit process for each one of your steps. And dependencies are typically built also on deliverables, all right? So they're very focused on what is the thing that I have to produce, not necessarily the activity that I'm doing, but what is the thing that I have to do? Is there a hard deliverable? Is there a piece of information? Is there a document or something like that? Those are the general rules for the dependencies. What is the project plan used for with a VPB? The project plan is used as input to the VPB. So if you have a project plan, all right, that becomes the starting point for building the VPB. All right, so the VPB is a summary of the major management points of your project plan. So it can be used, you can use it for smaller groups, local work groups. So for example, we had this big portfolio board. We had, with the 500 projects or however many it was, hundreds of projects, hundreds of engineers, but they did not all appear on a single board. We actually had one board for a small work group which fed the status to the summary board for the project portfolio. So that's probably a longer question than you wanted, or longer answer than you wanted. All right, Brian says, well, how long does it take to draft your first board from concept to on the wall? Good question. It depends. We can do it in 3 days if we have a workshop. If we've got everybody in the room for 3 days, we can go from 0 to on the wall in 3 days. If we don't, and we have to walk around and we have to do our management by walking around, then what we have to do is we have to do interviews, and we have to circle back with the team, and sometimes it'll take 2 weeks-ish to build the process. And sometimes it also depends too on the complexity. So in the case of that that second thing where we had to build a project network and we had to vet the project network and everybody was running around with their hair on fire, that took about 3 weeks. So I would say 3 days if I can get everybody in the room, 3 weeks if I can't. And do I use critical chain thinking in the system? Yes. All right, critical chain thinking is used in at least at the board level. We find critical chain thinking in designing the outcomes of each process step. So at that process, we're working on deliverables, working backwards to forwards. We're also thinking in terms of, we're also using the TOC definition of value, what creates value. And when we get to the board, we're really not focusing on individual tasks. We're focusing more on, where are we versus the entire project. I mean, we are focusing on an individual task, but we're not using task due dates and that sort of thing. We're using more of where are we on the project? Now, the board, starts that most basic level of work at basic collaboration. And when we look at Viewpoint as a system, it does use critical chain in the higher levels of execution maturity. So what I invite you to do, Frank, is look at, there's on the Pinnacle Strategies website, there's a short video that talks about the project execution maturity model. And you can see how the execution maturity uses different TOC and critical chain thinking throughout the process. It is not, the visual project board is not your project network. I'll tell you that the reason that we developed this model is because we wanted to get results quickly. And to do a critical chain implementation, you have to build the plan, do your task estimation strategies, you have to figure out your resource pools, find the critical chain, then you can focus on execution behaviors. So what we did is we said, well, we don't have time to all that. We had a client that was, needed results right now. So what we did is we started at the end, what are the execution behaviors? And then we worked backward and said, okay, now that our execution behaviors are in place, then we can go and focus on the more detailed planning and making a comprehensive plan, do probabilistic planning, even Monte Carlo analysis and that sort of thing. So that's a really long, it's a really great question, but it's pretty long. Frank, if you want to talk offline, I'd be happy to do that. And also, do we have a fever chart? Yes. Let's see if I can find one. I might have one in a prior slide, but it's not a fever chart like the classic fever chart that you find in TOC or in critical chain. This is a picture of VISM. Now, VISM is our, we use fever charts when we want to calculate, when we have a lot of calculations. And we can make fever charts manually, but what you see on these cards are 2 bar graphs. You see, let's look right here, Project Tyler D16, where my arrow is. You can see CP, this is a completed percentage, and then I've got a buffer completed, and you can see they're different colors. So you see the buffer completion is how much buffer is consumed, and in this case, 100%, and how much work is completed. And in this case, it looks like about 1/3. And this yields a schedule risk index of 5.23. So what we're using in the Viewpoint methodology as is the we're treating the board, the steps, the transformation steps on the board as our critical chain. So if we have a critical chain, obviously that's going to be the most important area that we're going to manage, and that will definitely be on the board. So the board, once I have a critical chain, then all of the stuff that I've talked about in terms of what are the major management points and that kind of stuff, all that stuff goes away, and the board becomes a summary of your critical chain, and each task or each project along that chain then will have its own critical chain. We changed the name, so we have this thing called the schedule risk index, which is essentially the buffer burn ratio from TOC. So, Frank, I hope that answers your question. That's a good question. And looks like any more? Are there any more questions? Well, that was pretty simple. It looks like I have no more questions, and everyone is still here. No one has left. Fantastic. All right. Well, I want to thank you for coming. And one of the things you should watch for is I'm going to have a live, I'll have a recording of this video on the Pinnacle Academy site, and you'll also be receiving a questionnaire, a survey. It's important to me that you're happy with what you got, and I'm always open for feedback. So thanks for coming, and ping me back. We'll see you at the next one.